Chapter 3. An Old Game.
The fellas grew a little impatient after a while, so I decided that I had rested long enough. I stretched out each leg in turn and blinked the sun out of my eyes and tried to think. There didn't seem to be much to do except the same old games. The boys were always coming up with something new. I was still a little upset that I hadn't been hatched a boy, but I could do nothing about that. I knew that my friends were all waiting on me for some exciting plan to fill the rest of our day. I couldn't think of anything. Not at the moment, anyway. I stalled for time. "Are the girls building sandcastles?"
"Nah, they quit."
I pretended to be awfully disappointed, as though I had thought of a real good idea for tormenting them at their play. Too bad. I sounded so convincing that Snapper volunteered to go find the girls and suggest that they start sandcastling again. Well, that wouldn't work. They'd know that we had something planned. We'll just have to wait until another time when they are building again. For a moment I thought that I was defeated. Then I happened to look out of the corner of my eye and see the duck family as it moved up from downstream to the area of the swimming hole. Here was an old game, but it was fun. I winked at the fellas and nodded my head. "Do you see what I see?" They followed my gaze, and one by one, grins began to appear on faces. "I'll lead. Woody, you follow. Then Snapper, then Tubbsy. Flip, you bring up the rear." I deliberately put Flip at the end just so that he would be reminded of his proper place. He hadn't beat me yet. "Move slowly and keep quiet. You know how spooky that old drake is." One by one we moved out quietly, me going first. I slid into the water with hardly a ripple. I dipped down to the bottom and settled myself while I waited for the other fellows to join me. When we had all gathered, I nodded my head at the kicking feet above us, and with a grin began to lift myself up slowly, cautiously, and carefully. When I was directly under the ducks, I carefully selected a pair of small paddling feet and reached up and nibbled on the toes. There was a squawk of fright from above, and all of the ducks began to swim madly in a circle, beating the water into foam and causing little ripples to spread out further and further. I allowed myself to sink quietly to the bottom again and grinned at the fellows, who were all grinning at me. We waited until the ducks had quieted down. Then I nodded at Snapper. He swam silently upward and carefully chose a pair of duckling feet. Edging himself forward, he reached up and gave one a quick little nip. Again there was a squawk and a flurry of excitement. We could hardly contain our laughter. It took longer for the ducks to settle down this time. We had to wait and wait until they stopped their fluttering around and returned to feeding. I finally gave Tubbsy the nod, and he carefully eased his way upward. He didn't bother with little feet. With great daring, he positioned himself directly under the mother. Making sure that we were all watching, he reached up and clamped down firmly on her toe. What a commotion! We could hear the ducks quacking and calling. The mother was insisting that they should move on, that something sinister was in the pond. The drake was admonishing everyone to be quiet and stop the foolishness. There was no reason why they shouldn't stay until they've had their fill.
"I've had my fill now, my fill of losing toes to unseen predators."
The ducklings, too, were upset, but it was the drake who won in the end. He quieted them all down and insisted that they had simply snagged a toe on an underground water plant. We had to go up for a bit of air while all of this was going on. When the drake finally settled his family down, we quietly lowered ourselves again, and I nodded to the fellas that this was now my turn again, and it would be the biggie. I was even more cautious than ever. I didn't want anything to scare off that big drake before I had had my fun. I think that the fellas waiting down below must have read my mind. There was not a whisper of a sound or a flutter of movement. It was hard positioning myself properly. That old drake kept switching directions on me. I had to alter my course back and forth and back and forth. Finally, I was in just the right spot, and with a quick forward thrust, I reached up and grabbed the toe of that drake in mid-paddle. What a fuss he made! I guess that he must have believed the others then, for he lost no time at all in making his departure. I'm not sure if he even waited to see that his family was following him. Squawking and quacking and screaming out all kinds of threats and insults, he lifted himself from the water and took off. The mother went flying after him, calling out that she had tried all along to tell him so, and one by one the ducklings chattered their way after them. At the bottom of the pond, we had the laugh of our lives.